Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining Dan Magala and myself. This is the voice of AJ Maestas today for the webinar. Our intention today was to illustrate the art and science associated with sponsorship investments. Our presentation today, including Q&A, should be done in less than 45 minutes and is designed to provide brands, properties, and agencies with the knowledge and tools necessary to create a value-maximizing sponsorships. If you want to submit a question during the webinar, just use the chat box at the bottom of the toolbox on the right of your screen. All right, with that said, we'll kick things off. The first speaker will be Dan Magala, as you can see on your screen right over here to the left, and he is the founder at PCG, a sponsorship and consulting firm that is uniquely positioned with extensive experience in driving sponsorship revenue through creativity and innovation. I've known Dan on both a professional and personal level for over 10 years and cannot think of any person better to speak on the art of sponsorship. This voice again is AJ Maestas, and I'm the founder of Navigate Research. We specialize in measuring the value and impact of sponsorship investments. Clients range from just about any league office you can name, from the National Rugby League in Australia to the NFL in the US. 13 of the top 15 sponsorship agencies use Navigate. All of the major networks, with ESPN being the most frequent, and there's roughly 40 brands that will use us this year for all or part of their investment portfolio and sponsorship. So with that said, I'm going to turn things on over here to Dan Magala.
Great. Well, thank you, AJ, and it's great to be here, and this is such a wonderful topic. I'm gonna go back in time a little bit before we move ahead and really talk about the first large-scale sponsorship I was a part of that really uncovered the art of sponsorship creation. If you look on the screen, there's three examples of three different deals that we worked with. The first one on the right was 7-Eleven with the Chicago White Sox. For those that weren't familiar with the program, probably like many of you on either the property side or on the brand and agency side, you've been in a situation where you knew that there was a good fit with a property, but really scratched your head as to what the perfect idea for that brand or property was. And in this case was brought on by the Chicago White Sox back in 2005 on behalf of a potential sponsor, 7-Eleven, to really try to uncover what's the perfect idea. We scratched our heads. We asked ourselves the questions of what would be the perfect activation strategy. And our recommendation in the end was to change the game times from 7:05 to 7-Eleven and actually sell that as inventory. And it really opened up the eyes to thinking beyond the sign, thinking beyond the promotion, and start to develop a process for what is the perfect sponsorship. And we didn't have the benefit at that time of Navigate, but one interesting thing as we talk about both creating the art and the science of a sponsorship was the fact that White Sox fans at the time were 10% less likely than the general population to visit a 7-Eleven on a daily basis. After that deal was done, research shows they're now 25% more likely on a daily basis to visit a 7-Eleven. And I think that's a perfect example of what we're going to talk about today. The idea was so authentic, so specific, so customized that it drove the revenue on the back end. So let's look at two other examples as well. TaylorMade, you see it, we essentially turned the foul pole, an 85-foot foul pole in San Diego's Petco Park, and we turned it into a large golf club to coincide with the launch of a new TaylorMade golf club. And if you think about it, the artistic side, that doesn't feel like an ad. We're going to get through the process here in a second. But I think when you look at the science of it and a lot of the research measurement that everybody here on the call is accountable for media value, positive return, ROI, and measurement, the amazing thing about TaylorMade was they essentially bought a glorified outfield wall sign, but they essentially bought also the values of innovation, progressive thought, and really stop and think about this from a measurement standpoint. The week that it was announced, they had a measured PR value of $75 million in that first week. And through the marriage of art and science, you can start to see how when you spend time on the creative process and in creating a package that's so customized to the specific brand, you can drive that financial results. Now, the large scale, you're probably wondering why you're looking at a picture of an aircraft carrier. This was a program we did for our client, Minor League Baseball, last year. And I think it's a great look at where we're going as an industry because it was really bought through social media dollars. This was really a viral campaign that happened to have a sponsorship. And I know we're going to hear a lot more from AJ later on some of the great work that Navigate's doing in areas of measuring social media. So to summarize, I think as we start to look ahead, we start to think outside the box for our big idea and the next steps that you should take. Here's really my 5 must-haves that you must go through an internal process in order to define it. I kind of joke sometimes that you don't want to be the Milli Vanilli, just the one-hit wonder in creating this artistic process. So what really makes sense? What are the 5 must-haves, and how do you start to marry it? And these are the 5: emotional connection, enhance, don't interrupt, moments of truth, authenticity, and ultimately revenue as a result, not an objective. The first one, emotional connection. The branding platform should look to engage the desired target audience through a variety of positive feelings like inspiration, fun, passion, and sentiment. So what does this really mean? You're trying to emotionally engage what the property is doing with what the brand is trying to do. I'll give you a great example. If you're at O'Hare Airport, BMO Harris Bank, with their tagline, "We're here to help," actually sponsors and underwrites the hand sanitizers throughout O'Hare. It's a way for them to show the emotion of "we're here to help," and they're aligning it with that sponsorship inventory. The second example, the second tenet, enhance, don't interrupt. No matter the environment, the branding platform should exercise discipline in creating a thematic that looks to communicate a message that enhances the consumer environment versus interrupting. The example that I would look to here, Avis actually has a wonderful sponsorship with the New York City Marathon. And if you guys want, you can look up, I wrote a column on this a while ago for Sports Business Journal, really studying the Avis sponsorship. They actually use their sponsorship, and really think about it. This is a rent-a-car company with a marathon. They use their sponsorship. Their tagline is "We're here to help," or "We try harder" is Avis's. And what they use their sponsorship for is they have volunteers that are employees that actually volunteer to run the race, and they use that as a message to show that we're here to help. And essentially what they're able to do is those Achilles heel runners, they take volunteers and they have handicapped runners that are in the middle of the circle that will actually run for the race. The third one is moments of truth. And this is basically defined as the desired branding platform connects the brand values of the product and the product that radiates truthfulness in the consumer's eyes. This was one that was done with Minor League Baseball and Kelly Services with the Omaha Royals. Think about this moment of truth and this connection. Kelly Services is a HR employee recruitment firm. For years, I'm sure many of you, from a team perspective, have tried to pitch a certain client and failed at certain times with the same package over and over again. And what the Omaha Royals started to do was they started to actually think like the clients with Kelly Services. So what is Kelly Services ultimately trying to do? They're trying to engage business decision makers, business leaders, essentially in showing what their products and services are about. So they artistically created a new program where they sponsored the kid CEO of the game, where kids actually, as part of the school system, went through and actually created a resume. And that was part of their sponsorship. They nominated, they went through the screening process, and ultimately they had a huge press conference, landed on the front page of the newspaper with the designation of the Kelly Services Kid CEO of the game. And what you've got here is it doesn't really feel like an ad, right? And that's one of the goals and one of the objectives that you want to try to achieve.
So we had a question from the audience, Dan, related to one of your points there with the High Life investment. And this is from Danny, our good friend Danny from Access Pass and Design. He basically asked, how do you value an organization's Facebook? I apologize, we're working on the those that are hearing ringing. Danny from Access Pass and Design, essentially, how are you selling social media assets and sponsorship investments value on those? So I think it's almost a two-pronged question for both of us.
Sure, and it's a great question. So in the case of the Miller High Life as a specific example, we look at it. Obviously, it's a new territory that we're getting into. So we essentially start out with a core rights fee just for the program, and then what we want to do is we want to measure it against success. So we'll sit down with the client. What does success look like? What is a stretch goal? In terms of engagement, because I think with social media, you're looking to measure engagement, in a much more aggressive manner. So there's an upside to the property to be able to build in that value from a growth perspective.
Well, that makes sense. And I would say, this is AJ, of course, I would say from a measurement perspective, Danny, people are spending, the average out there ranges between $5 and $15 on a CPM basis for social media and digital assets in sports, but we don't believe that's anywhere near the correct price. We actually have a study coming out this winter on social and digital media in sports, a syndicated study available for sale. And one of the really interesting, it's already in the field and we have already seen results. One of the interesting findings from it is that social media is a close second in the most impactful tactics in which you can use to promote a sponsorship. But is being sold with the cheapest, assets or promotional tactics, used in sponsorship activation. The difference or the delta between those two is almost 1/100th. And so what I'm saying is that if you look at it on an impact basis versus what people are paying for it, it's being valued about 1/100th of what it's really worth. Now I realize that you can't go times your price by 100 and get that tomorrow, but it's an interesting highlight on one of the greatest arbitrage opportunities we've ever seen for sellers and buyers to take advantage of a right or benefit in promotion. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff that this study is actually going to be able to share. It'll share data on how it influences consumers as well as the values or the prices that people are paying. But good question. Social media and Facebook come up all the time, Danny. With that, we're going to transition into some of more of the science stuff actually in Navigate's world. And I'd just like to take just a quick second to take a look at how important measurement is now, and the quick answer is that it's not super important. There's over $19 billion being spent each year domestically, $50 billion globally, but almost 3/4 of those sponsors are spending less than 1% of their budgets to measure the impact of those investments. It is amazing to me, being in the age of accountability that we live in right now. It's also surprising given how highly visible these investments are and that they're subject to so much scrutiny. But it is what it is. Certainly, we at Navigate think that the future will hold a different story. Our recommendation is to spend 1% to 3% of your total budget on measurement. Certainly, I could look biased in giving that recommendation, given that it's what I do for a living. But I can assure you that our sell-side clients sell more and retain more by backing their creative selling with the science of measurement and research. And the same is true for our agency and brand side clients. Budgets and careers grow when you understand what works, you understand what doesn't work, and you invest intelligently based on that information. So with that transition, I just wanted to walk you through this one slide here of some fun facts basically that we've learned from our database on sponsorship performance. This database is made up of hundreds of studies where we track the success of sponsorship investments, ranging from awareness to consideration, trial, loyalty, and ultimately purchase. This is, of course, proprietary to Navigate, but it's something we share with all of our clients, and it's built into about 90% of the custom research we do. So the good news is, as you can see, when sponsorships are done well or correctly, fans that are made aware of a sponsorship are 5 times more likely to purchase and twice as likely to recommend. So the quick story is that it works. When you do it right, it works, and it works damn well. Now remember that there's a big if in this statement. You have to take those 5 steps that Dan outlined earlier to make people aware and authentically connected with the brand that they love, that team or that entertainment entity. With that said, though, there's no form of media that can consistently offer an equivalent impact. I think we've all heard thousands of times that we as an industry should activate more, but how much more is not easy to pin down. In our experience and supported by that database I mentioned earlier, we found that our clients that spend an average of 50 cents in activation for every $1 in rights fees reach often a point of diminishing returns, but they are also the proud owners of the highest performing sponsorships that we have ever measured. This, of course, varies by industry, but on average, in the major sponsorship categories, the average activation budget is actually below 25 cents to a dollar. So as a quick rule of thumb, most of you out there could double what you're spending on activation to reach that optimal return on investment. As you can imagine, and as we coach many of our brand side clients on, if you can't afford to activate it correctly and the property doesn't have a quality service division that can do this for you, then don't make the investment. It does not work if you cannot make that kind of investment. Moving forward, I just wanted to take you a moment to walk through a few levels of measurement and research, or the science side of what we see working for people. In the upper right of your screen right now, you can see a bubble that says sales data and empirical evidence. At the most basic level, a buyer or seller of sponsorships, you should make an attempt to tie the sponsored investment to empirical evidence of success. It can be hard to isolate that impact, and many times as a seller or even as a brand that doesn't have retail level data, it can't be done. But the ultimate answer is sales and the profit that is associated with that sales tied directly to an investment. It continues to shock me how many organizations that have access to this don't take advantage of it. AG does a great job at this. They're a good example of selling against business that they can deliver. A lot of times that's B2B, but other times it is directly measurable against their sales. But they sell a big concept. They sell the future. They use creative selling, as Dan has described, and they deliver their sponsors actual revenue when the opportunity presents itself. The next topic would be the two bubbles as you move your way down and to the left. That's ROO and secondary research. Return on objectives, that's ROO, is far from true return on investment, but it's still far better than flying blind. Ohio University conducts a study every other year for the National Sports Forum with the top 50 sponsors, and every time their top concern with sellers is knowing their business. This speaks to the art and science of sponsorship selling. Know your clients' business objectives and marketing objectives and set metrics against those goals. These can be as simple as likes on a Facebook page or redemption of a promotional offer. I would say the same thing applies to agencies and brands looking to make investments. Take a quick look at what's taking place in the marketplace. If all of your competitors are in golf, it's likely that golf offers an emotional connection to your target audience, but crowded spaces don't offer as many moments of truth or authenticity either. My advice would be to look for the white space as a buyer and find where your competitors are not playing or are not activating well. And as a seller, obviously, find a brand that needs your fans. This can all be done with a small investment in time and research, often for free. These are things you can discover through Google or syndicated databases and resources that aren't near as expensive as you might guess. Now, I realize that relationships open the door to most of sales, but once that door is open through a relationship, do your homework before sitting down with a qualified prospect. I guess that's essentially what I'm asking people to do. This is a little bit of a cheesy statement, but I think many of who I know, and we have over 250 people out there listening, many of which Dan and I know personally, so thank you again for attending, have heard me say this, which is Navigate has a friends fly free on the small stuff policy. So we subscribe to just about any database you can think of, and if you find yourself stuck and just need a nugget of information, it's okay to shoot an email to me or Dan and just ask for that advice. And if we can, for free, ethically, share it with you, we will. If you look further down on the left, there are a cluster of bubbles around value, media exposure, and valuation. As a seller, price is one of the only variables you always control. In Navigate's experience, the most common price challenges exist around media valuations, which will always find the CPM, or cost per thousand, for your sponsorship to be too high. There is a reason, of course, and that's because sponsorships are not media. They offer many marketing benefits ranging from rights, marks, logos, passion, experiential, and beyond that offer a far higher impact than media can. Remember that 5x, 2x statistic I shared earlier. So if you find yourself defending your price when you know the market will pay that price, you have to say no. If they want to pay less, I'm talking about the sponsor, they'll have to accept less assets, rights, and benefits. Oftentimes, when our clients do use the power of no and they say no, the buyer quickly reveals what is most important to them and puts the leverage back in the hands of the seller. Our valuation methodology at Navigate is actually designed to reveal true market price, so it's not one of those services that gives you sort of the large puffy number. Those tend to be used more for sort of CYA, and they have their place, of course, but ours tend to be used for decision-making on revealing what something is actually worth. For that reason, we often advise our sell-side clients when they purchase purchase evaluation from us to ask for a price that is a little bit of a stretch goal. So something that is attainable essentially, but a little bit of a stretch. So let's say 20% more than you believe it's really worth. This gives you room to negotiate down in price to satisfy the buyer in the negotiation process while still protecting what you know to be the true value of your inventory. As a buyer and using these valuation type services, I would tell you that information is the only variable you always control, and brands often find themselves in an information disparity when buying sponsorships. The seller deals with sponsorships every day and is trained to use perfect price discrimination to get every possible dollar out of your organization. For buyers who don't make similar investments dozens of times per year in that same field, sport, or market, well, if you're facing a large decision, my advice is lean on your agency or a firm like Navigate to ensure that the price you pay matches market value. It's almost impossible to drive a quality ROI if you start by overpaying for the sponsorship. The final cluster of bubbles speaks to the understanding of impact or outcomes. This is the most difficult and expensive form of measurement, and fittingly, it's the most powerful. At the end of the day, as a buyer of sponsorships, your job is to drive positive outcomes. Paying the right price is important, but your job is to sell products or services, and these methods reveal what investments are truly working. Sales tracking actually could be a part of this conversation, but most of the time these methods are based in custom market research, such as surveys that reveal how you've influenced or changed consumers' minds about your brand, product, or service. Remember, corporate budget is fungible, and if you aren't delivering results, eventually that budget will disappear. Brands, careers, and budgets grow with positive outcomes, and I've seen it firsthand from the work we've done with our clients. The best marketers we work with want to know the truth so they can reallocate dollars that aren't working hard enough to areas where the opportunity exists to amplify the positive impact of investments that are working. Ultimately, that also leads to things like knowing, where the highest ROI sponsorships lie based on your experience in your brand. For the sellers in our audience, the easiest renewal you will ever face is one in which you know you are delivering ROI. It takes a pretty damaged corporate environment to pull an investment that is a proven winner. Conversely, I would expect your greatest upsales and new sales to use some combination of the art and science that we're discussing today. One of my favorite examples is the work of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, who used a sponsorship impact study from our team at Navigate to triple what was already their largest sponsorship deal at one of their properties. Essentially, they commissioned research that proved the business impact, so not value, but business impact. And when they presented this to the CMO, it enabled the budget to triple in order for them to hold on to that investment. It's not every day you can triple your largest sponsorship investment using research, but I'm confident that it has never happened without an impressive business case being made beyond more than just common metrics like increased audience. And you can be sure that there were some creative solutions in that sale too.
Yeah, sure. And I'll echo what AJ said. I mean, I think that's where you really get to really hitting the gas pedal on ROI when you start to marry, both the ROI with the art and the science. The fifth virtue that I really focus on, revenue is a result, not an objective. I want to give an example of this because, much like that Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment example, if you can start to artistically create a program that so perfectly matches that brand's objectives that revenue is a direct result of, you can start to see where you can really drive significant revenue growth either for yourself as a property or brand. So let me give you an actual example of how that works again. So get in the mindset of revenue is a result, not an objective. Use the example of Kia with WWE a few years back. Kia was really new to the market. They really didn't have a massive sponsorship budget. They wanted to really accelerate their ability to sell cars to attendees of WWE events. So they used the ticket back, but they used the ticket back in a very creative way, and that ticket back actually drove attendees to take their car into a Kia dealership for a free oil change. So what is Kia's objective? First and foremost, it's to get people to, before they can buy a car, to actually see a car. So get you onto the lot and use something like an oil change that has a $30 value, but really maybe cost them $1.50 or so in hard cost to actually deliver. And all of a sudden, the regions that they started to test that in through research started to have their highest sales. People sniffed around the Kia in a way that they hadn't before, and that partnership grew as a result. And I think that's one of those important things when you're designing. We all We'd all love to be able to utilize research, in an activity like Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. But if you can start to design it in the beginning, understand what is the objective that client wants to do, and look at revenue as a result of that program, I think that's a significant way to look at it, and we've seen that with a ton of our clients.
Oh yeah, that's a great example, Dan. Thank you for sharing that. I have two case studies you'll see on the screen in front of you right now that I was just going to touch on quickly before we jump into Q&A. The reason we chose these two case studies are these are two of the most common challenges or questions or value versus impact, I guess I'd say challenges we find our clients facing. The first one on the left you'll see is LG's activation at Racquettown at the Final Four. Proud to say they're a client, obviously. On-site experiential is very expensive, and it often gets cut because of the cost per touch, which we agree with at times. But the smart brands know that experiential drives the highest impact on consumers. The question just becomes at what cost? So for this reason, I'm a fan of using experiential where complex messages need to be delivered and or the customer has to experience the product to truly have that epiphany moment. So the example you're looking at on that screen is one of those scenarios where LG was introducing their 3D TVs. And trust me when I say you really do have to see it and wear the glasses to consider buying one of those TVs. The one to your right, the second example, is a great viral video series that Farmers Insurance created, another client, by harnessing their existing PGA investment and their existing endorsement with Ricky Fowler to just create a conversation around their brand. When consumers are talking about your brand versus you talking about your brand, far more people listen. Our head of research has his PhD in experimental psychology and has been doing work in this field for over 25 years. One of the really cool things about his psychology background is it really confirms a lot of the 5 points that Dan took us through at the beginning of this webinar, which is about being authentic and touching on those points of passion and essentially allowing people to lower their walls of receptivity to a commercial message. I think we all know that we receive hundreds of commercial messages a day, thousands, some people claim, and they just fly by unnoticed. It's really these special moments created through integrated marketing or sponsorships, as our topic today speaks to, where a consumer can attach passion and forget, that it's a conversation with a brand. And boy, I can assure you, we believe and expect those outcomes from these viral videos where people are passing them on to one another and friends. And of course, it's all sponsored and brought to you by Farmers Insurance in a very passive and authentic way. So with that all said, let's jump into Q&A. This first one, I think maybe both Dan and I could touch on, and that's, do you recommend a sponsorship spend versus a traditional media spend, and why?
I had a meeting last week that was a real interesting comment. I'd say looking 5 years out, if anything, I'd see more hybrid type packaging of budgets. I think if we're talking 5 years ago, does this go in the sponsorship bucket or does this go in the media bucket? I'm seeing these hybrid deals, and the explanation I got from a sponsorship executive was he feels almost like a conductor of a symphony, that he's pulling different parts from different instruments in order to make the whole symphony sing. So he now needs a media budget, he needs a social media budget, hospitality. One of the things that we often forget about in the sponsorship business is one of the target audience that I'm seeing a lot more of creatively, and TaylorMade is actually a perfect example. One of their target audiences for that program was their employees. So we actually used some of their HR budget, to bring out hospitality so they could have the celebratory moment in front of what is now the world's largest golf club. And I think that started to really change the way that you look at it. So the more that you can help your decision maker manage their budget, almost like a conductor in a symphony, I think that's the way to really open up those incremental dollars.
Well, that's good, Dan. And, if I could add from the measurement perspective on that trade-off of traditional media versus sponsorship, I would say, I know this is a tough visual, but picture a normal chart with your X and Y axis, and on those axes are essentially effectiveness and price. And if you look to traditional media, let's just take television, and you're trying to drive early sales funnel metrics like awareness, nothing beats broad awareness in a quick way than traditional measured media, TV, followed by radio and print. But I think smart marketers are not asking themselves how loud are you speaking, but they're asking how many people do hear you, and that would be effectiveness. And so on the effectiveness edge of the scale, nothing compares to experiential and sponsorship. But as we all know, it comes at a much higher cost per touch. So if you were to treat that chart I just described to you as an efficient frontier and you slide your investment portfolio along that frontier, ask yourselves, does this brand need early sales funnel measures like awareness? And they might if you're announcing a new vehicle or a new product or it's a promotional weekend. But most brands in the sponsorship game don't. Most people know of these brands and know them well and have 95, 98% plus awareness levels. If your objective is to now change behavior to convert more people to buy your product or service, or to go deeper with your existing products or services, it is further on that scale of experiential and sponsorship where they should be investing. So that's a really quick, simple example of it. But the average Fortune 500 company is about 75% upfront and measured media and 25% experiential, digital, or below the line. And I believe that needs to shift closer to 50-50. And the best of our clients are there. Nike, as an example, spends over 80% on below-the-line experiential sponsorship and digital. I think it'd be pretty hard to argue what they've done with their brand. So I think that although it's changing, people need to slide further in the direction of sponsorship on that scale. Our next question here asks, how do you see sponsorships changing in the future? Are you noticing any trends? Dan, this is definitely for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real interesting and timely question. One of our clients is minor league baseball. And we do a lot of inventory analysis, inventory creations for properties, really trying to solve this question of preparing them for 5 years out. And minor league baseball is an interesting example. They've got 160 teams, 75% footprint across the U.S. How do you start to kind of aggregate that and start to look at it holistically in the way that a buyer would look at it? And the talking points that we keep focus on are really two things: getting away from one-size-fits-all sponsorships, and ultimately arriving at a place, and for the brand people on this side, I'm sure you guys can appreciate this, creating ownable assets for them. I think more and more what we're seeing moving forward is brands want to own something, that marries with their actual brand itself, that kind of connects with the property in a meaningful way, again, that, resonates truthfulness in the consumer's eyes. I mean, AJ's examples, from Farmers with the Ricky Fowler campaign and even LG, that authentically integrates with it. And that's not something you could offer to one of their competitors if you're the property representing them. It so perfectly matches their value. We almost call it kind of like a soulmate type idea. And I think that level of time, that level of effort is really where this industry is going, because brands need that. I think consumers are wise. To your point, AJ, I think you said like 1,000 or so, sales messages that you're receiving in a day. The more it doesn't feel like an ad, the more it's gonna drive ROI. And to me, I see this industry going in the direction of creating those ownable assets customized to those brands.
Ooh, you know what? That's a nice segue into the next question, actually. And I think both of us could actually speak to this. I'll start. But the question is, with hundreds of sponsorships in the sports world, how does a brand break through all the clutter? I tell you, my example would be, and by the way, to qualify this, how you break through, there really isn't much truth to exclusivity anymore. Someone can always invade via media or through comparable assets. They can use endorsements and have an implied endorsement with your property. What I really like is our client State Farm Insurance does a great job, often not actually having official rights, of owning a proprietary element and truly taking complete ownership of it. I think what they did with for a few years there with the Major League Baseball All-Star Game was great. There was a cause element, there was a sponsorship element, there was no question you could miss if you were at the All-Star Game or watched the All-Star Game or anything along those lines. That they owned Home Run Derby and they own that All-Star Game platform. So I would say it's create your own breakthrough the clutter type element that you own in a proprietary way. And I can tell you from the measurement perspective, it's as we know, if you don't get through that first hurdle of awareness, people can't have all those other incredible outcomes I described, that 5x, 2x, buy versus recommend. So yes, I didn't want to trounce awareness with my earlier examples of measured media and traditional media versus sponsorship, but you do have to take that great step to stand out. State Farm's the best I can think of. Dan, anything come to mind?
Yeah, and you know what? Actually, a word to the wise here, more than anything. And we get pulled into a ton of meetings, people wanting really big ideas, and we're almost judged as much by the stuff we say no to as the stuff we actually greenlight. And I think to be cautious of in trying to break through the clutter is avoid the sugar high sponsorship. The one that kind of just does a quick boom for a second and is not aligned with a business objective, doesn't have ROI in mind. And I see those are the ones that really fail. And that's the one I think really is, even as an industry, we need to kind of collectively be aware of and cautious of, because we want to make sure that those breakthrough clutter ideas are aligned with ROI, are aligned with business objectives. And ultimately then, on the back end, we've got the research to back it up that it works, because otherwise kind of it lends to, the reverse of authenticity is almost ineffectiveness, right? That you get to the point that the programs don't work and everybody loses them.
Well, that's good. No, that's very, very helpful. I have a quick hitter one here that I think I can quickly address for everybody, and it's basically asking, do you have any guidelines or recommendations for organizations with little research budget? Yeah, absolutely. That's an easy one. I think Dan actually spoke to this well earlier when he said, hey, in the sales process, build in the metrics or objectives that they have into outcomes that they'd like to see. It's easy in the renewal process if you're able to take that evidence to them and say, this is what you told us at the beginning. All along the way as you coach your team to activate and promote this and look for it to be successful, what you need to do to make that be successful. Let's say that was the key example with test drives. No money, no cost to that. Simple basic metrics and understanding and listening to them when you're in the sales process and building those into your actual contract and then making that part of your fulfillment reporting. If you're ever stuck on one, on the industry or category, like I promised earlier, friends, so I free on the small stuff, you can imagine we deal with every category under the sun. We can probably give you 2 or 3 real quick hitters that you should be measuring if you're ever stuck. Dan, the next question looks like a good one for you, actually. That's any tips for the most successful partners, how the most successful partners come together?
Sure, and this might be an obvious one, but it's a good reminder. I think just honesty, especially as we get into this more of this information era, for the property activation people, you've got so much more data that you have access to as far as your season's going along. Let's say you're an NFL team right now and you're running a sponsorship and it's week 5 and it's not delivering the results that it should. I can tell you the brands that I talk to and work with, they want to hear that. They want to hear that honest feedback. Don't wait till the end of the year to give them the binder essentially for, maybe saying that the program didn't work. Be upfront. I'll give a real quick example. This is from about 10 years ago. Now defunct Continental Airlines, which is now United Airlines, had a sponsorship with the New York Yankees. Their direct bullseye with that Yankee sponsorship was to create, engagement with business travelers. And the program just wasn't working. Continental actually the Yankees did some exit surveys amongst their suite holders. It wasn't resonating. And they just said, hey, whatever message we have is not working. We want to work more strategically with you, with the inventory you have in our activation team to make it sing. And what they landed on was they asked themselves the question of, if you're a business traveler on Continental and you're a Yankee fan, why would you use them? And they started to look at miles against experiences, and they landed on a program where they introduced it halfway through the season, where if you had 50,000 miles, you got to attend batting practice. If you had 250,000 miles, you got to meet Derek Jeter on the line, and they used the artistic quality of that, but it was all driven by the fact that the Yankees were honest with Continental, and it grew into one of their more successful programs. But, sponsorship at the end of the day, it's a marriage between the property and the brand. And the more that you can look at it through the stages of the marathon, be honest and truthful, let the data really help guide the program. I think that that's going to grow tremendous come renewal time and ultimately the relational trust between the brand and the property.
Well, thank you, Dan. And I think that about wraps up our time here together. But on your screen, you can see both Dan's email address as well as mine. Please know that you can follow up directly with us. We will actually be following up with you all, looking for your feedback as well. And if you could just take a moment to give that feedback, it's a great favor to us when we produce content like this. For all of you who have signed up and registered, you can also receive a recorded copy of this. So if it's something you care to share with your organization, or you have a friend out there that you think would get any value out of this, it's your right to share, and we'll be sending that to you